All right, in this lesson, we're going to walk you through what happens when we recover debt that we've already written off on our account. So let's start by talking about what we're talking about or what we're trying to do in this lesson. So what happens when a company writes off bad debt and then the customer decides to pay their balance afterwards? How do we handle the recovery of the bad debt? So what do we do? So we wrote off their bad debt. They've come back to us. Maybe they want to buy more stuff, but they know that they have to pay us back for the old stuff. And when they do that, then we might think about selling the new stuff to them. So what do we need to do? Well, here's the mechanics of recovering those bad debt. When we do recover the bad debt, we've got two steps. The first step that we need to do is we actually need to reverse the write-off. So if you remember, a couple of lessons ago, we said that when we write off the bad debt, we would debit the allowance for bad debt and credit the accounts receivable because we're writing off the receivable. So in step number one of recovering the bad debt, we actually need to reverse that entry as if the write-off never happened. To do that, we've got a journal entry on your screen where you're going to debit the accounts receivable. So that's the reestablishment of the receivable. And we're going to credit the allowance for doubtful accounts. So basically, we're putting the money back in the cookie jar and we're establishing the receivable. So then once we have the receivables on our books, then we can collect payment against that receivable. So once we've done that, we've reversed out the write-off. Then step number two is that we're going to collect the payment like we normally do. So to collect the payment that we normally do, we would debit cash because we're receiving cash, and we would extinguish their accounts receivable for the second time. So that's what we would do when we're recovering bad debt. We would reverse the write-off, and then we would collect their cash like we normally do. Now, some students might look at this and go, well, if you notice here, we have accounts receivable on step one as a debit and accounts receivable as a credit in step number two. Couldn't we just squish them together, which would cancel them out, and then just debit cash and credit allowance for doubtful accounts? Because basically we're just going to put it back in the allowance, but in a different way. So we might have a combined entry that looks something like this. The only problem with just doing this, where we debit cash and then credit the allowance to kind of put it back in the allowance, is that by doing this, we're not actually hitting the customer's subsidiary account. So when we do this, we're not actually keeping track of whether or not that customer paid or not, because this will kind of bypass that. So by recovering the write-off and then booking the payment like we normally do in a journal entry, we're actually creating an audit trail so that we can see that, oh, we wrote off the customer amount and then we reversed it and then the customer paid. So we can kind of see the history. And that's so important, especially if we want to do business with them in the future. We need to know that, oh, we did write that off, but they did pay us. So now we have to be a little bit cautious on whether or not we want to make any more sales to them. So it's super important that we do the long way instead of just shortcutting it here and debiting cash and crediting allowance for bad debt. So audit trail is super important in accounting so that we kind of know what's going on with all of our books. So that is a look at recovering of bad debt. If you have this situation, what you're going to need to do is reverse the write-off and then collect the cash like you would normally do. So hope you enjoyed this lesson. We'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure you press the like button below. And if you're looking for worksheets that go along with all of these lessons, head over to my website at patrickleemsa.com or click in the link in the far right. And I've got your next lesson right over here. So just click that link and it'll take you to that video. So until then, we'll see you in the next lesson.